Welcome back to another episode of the Tech Talks Daily podcast. I'm your host, Neil C. Hughes, and today we have a luminary in the field of cybersecurity joining us today because the co-founder and CEO at Eureka Security is going to be joining me. And she has a transformative background that encompasses tech leadership roles and a prior stint at Palo Alto Networks. But today, she's at the forefront of data security, which I think is so important, especially as we navigate this intricate landscape of security in the cloud. And in today's conversation, we're going to learn more about her journey as a female tech leader, unpack the shift from on-premise to cloud-based solutions, and explore the unique methodologies that Eureka Security is employing to safeguard that data. From redefining threat hunting paradigms to navigating the complexities of data security posture management, all within that broader cloud security ecosystem. I can promise you that our discussion will be both enlightening and cautionary. So whether you are a CIO, a tech entrepreneur, or someone just keenly interested in the complex but essential world of data security, this episode will have insights that hopefully will catalyse your thinking and possibly even change your approach to tech solutions. But buckle up and hold on tight, because today I'm going to be beaming your ears all the way to Tel Aviv in Israel, where today's guest is waiting to join me today. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell everyone listening a little about who you are, what you do, and your background as a female tech leader and entrepreneur?
Of course, my pleasure. Thank you for having me. So I'm Liat Hayun. I am the CEO of Eureka Security. We'll talk more about Eureka Security in a few minutes, but just in a few words, Eureka helps organizations protect sensitive data stored in the cloud. I founded Eureka along with my co-founder Asaf about 2 years ago. And before that, I spent 6 years leading different product management teams across different products at Palo Alto Networks. And then before that, like many Israeli entrepreneurs, especially in cybersecurity, I spent about a decade in the intelligence forces of the IDF, of the Israeli Defense Force. So I started my technological career basically at 18. I've been doing cybersecurity ever since that day, which is a great privilege to be kind of thrown into this world, which I have a lot of fun being a part of for the majority of my lifetime.
Fantastic. Well, it's a huge pleasure to have you on the podcast. And I'm curious there, looking at your backstory, were there any specific learnings from those days with Palo Alto Networks? And how did they shape philosophies in maybe building Eureka, including the way to start a company? Because I feel that you must have picked up so much during that period.
Yeah. So maybe a little bit of background around that. So I joined Palo Alto Networks about a year after its first acquisition in Israel. It sounds odd now. Palo Alto Networks have been acquiring so many companies in such a fast pace. But back then, it was about almost a year after their first acquisition in Israel. So the entire Israeli site, which is today over 1,000 people, was only 80 people. That was it. I was around the 80th employee at the Israeli site for Palo Alto Networks. And I was a part of the endpoint security team. So that created a lot of opportunities, a lot of growth opportunities and learning opportunities for me. First and foremost, just to kind of focus on one thing that I've already mentioned, a huge growth in the company, right? So it was like sitting on a balloon that keeps inflating, and I was a part of that, so I could see more and be a part of larger projects and bigger products. And that was a great thing to be a part of. I joined when we had dozens of customers to a product that was just recently acquired by Palo Alto Networks, and was a part of being leading it towards thousands of customers. So that has implications on how support looks like, how customer success looks like. How do you make your sales team successful at scale? And of course, from a technical side, how do you make the product fit so many different use cases, so many different organizations, so many different industries? So that has created a ton of learning opportunities for me. It was a great pleasure. And then from a more technical side, back then the product was very much focused on on-prem, both in terms of what we were protecting as well as how the product was managed. So when you think about your regular endpoint security product, you have your agents deployed on the endpoints, on the machines themselves, and you have the management solution. And back then it was all on-prem. So in my time at Palo Alto Networks, we also took it from an on-prem solution to a cloud solution, understanding what the requirements are, what the architecture looks like, what the risks are that are associated with it, but also what are the opportunities now that we have a product that sees across different customer organizations instead of being siloed in one of those organizations. And the peak of that, maybe where that kind of is most emphasized, is my last role at Palo Alto Networks was building and leading the threat hunting team. And again, just a quick recap for those who might not be aware of what threat hunting is or how it's being done. Basically, what you need to be able to do threat hunting well is a ton of data, right? You want to sift through a lot of data, identify anomalies, identify suspicious events. And we've done that very successfully for organizations that either couldn't have that function in-house because it requires such a unique skill set, or weren't able to do that at scale. And because we had this enormous amount of data, it was now all stored in the cloud. This was a great resource for other teams in the organization. So you can imagine how many requests I've gotten for a specific analysis or a specific inquiry from our product analysts and our ML engineers and our data scientists and our malware researchers and so on that wanted to tap into that data to create more insights, to better the rest of the product portfolio of Palo Alto Networks. So I was kind of in the middle of that inherent trade-off between how do we use data to fuel the business, to help it run faster, and how do we make sure that data remains protected, remains secure, that you don't have over-permissive access to it, and so on. You don't have copies of the data floating around. And that basically is what led to the birth of Eureka Security.
Wow, an incredible story. And I would imagine throughout your career, you've seen so many big changes right across the industry. And in particular, I'm curious about the evolution of data security posture management, or should I say DSPM space. And how have you seen that evolve, and how does it fit inside that bigger cloud security umbrella? Because you must have seen so many different changes and evolution within that space.
And it's actually two evolutions happening at the same time, right? If we go 10 years back, two very significant things have happened. So the first one is this huge adoption of cloud by various organizations. And when I say cloud, it doesn't just mean public cloud. It could be data warehouses and data lakes and so on. I don't need to tell you or anyone listening to us about cloud adoption and what happened with that over the last 10 years. Anyone in the tech community knows how significant that revolution has been to our industry. At the same time, though, we also experienced the data revolution, right? Organizations it's much easier for any team to now be able to leverage and use AI and ML tools in their logic, in their products. 10 years back, you had to have like your data science doctors as part of your organization. The Googles of the world had that privilege of creating their own AI models, their own ML mechanisms. And that is no longer the case. We're now seeing that even more with OpenAI and LLM models and all of that. That is just the progression of how accessible AI and ML tools have become. And the fact that any organization can now use AI as part of their product increases their motivation to store a lot of data in higher levels of sensitivity, right? Because you don't store data if you don't need it. But now there's so many more reasons to need that data. So you have more organizations storing more data, higher levels of sensitivity, and doing that in the cloud. And doing that not just in the cloud as kind of a high-level mechanism, but doing that in various data storage technologies across different public clouds, across different data warehouses, and so on. So the need is there. You have a lot of data stored in the cloud. You have that data being managed by various controls, different configurations, A cloud security expert needs to understand different levels of configurations and controls across different technologies, different levels of granularity when it comes to how data can be accessed and what parts of the data can be accessed. So there's a very high level of complexity around that. And then at the same time, as I've mentioned before, around kind of the Palo use case, many more teams in the organization want to be able to leverage that data. So security teams are now being tasked with the mission of enabling the business to use that data, but to do that securely, because data breaches have not gone anywhere. They just changed in how they look like, right? It's not just someone infiltrating your data center. It's now also someone accidentally leaving an S3 bucket publicly accessible. So that is why data security is increasing in need and changing the way that we need to think about that. It's no longer about who do you send an email to. It's also about how do you manage your critical data infrastructure in a way that allows those business use cases without putting data at risk.
And on behalf of any business leader that's listening to our conversation, nodding their head in agreement with things that you're talking about here, especially with the increasing complexity of cloud environments, what do you think are the most critical challenges that you're seeing businesses face in terms of securing their data and securing their assets?
So we're seeing two types of businesses, I think, and those listening to us would probably very quickly understand which one they fall into. Yeah. So what type of businesses is the ones that want to make sure they have all the controls, all the mechanisms in place, all the guardrails before enabling the business to kind of move forward. So those are the businesses where if someone wants to use Snowflake tomorrow morning, they would go through this review and this process to ensure that the way they're using Snowflake is correct. And then the second type of businesses are the ones that say, let engineering do what engineering needs to do to run its course, to make sure the business proceeds as needed, and we'll follow up after. We'll make sure everything is protected. In both cases, though, the level of complexity we talked about exists, and you need not just to be able to understand where data is, what it is, and how is it managed on a particular moment in time, at a particular moment in time. You need to do that on an ongoing basis. So the challenges are really, how do you make sure that data can be used by different teams but is not drifting to environments where it shouldn't be? How do you ensure that you give access to the people and applications and services that need to have access to that data without giving too much access or without forgetting to remove someone or some app that is no longer relevant? How do you make sure that the risk that you understand the risk, that you accept it, and there's nothing malicious or suspicious happening within that acceptable level of risk? And that is really where everything comes together, because that's the challenge that those two types of organizations are still experiencing. In how do they ensure that data breaches are reduced to a minimum, that the chances of a data risk of a data breach is almost non-existent.
And of course, for many people listening, you're finding yourself in a space that is incredibly crowded right now. So what would you say Eureka's unique approach is to security data in the cloud? Anything you can tell me about that? What makes you guys different and stand out from the crowd?
Of course. So maybe I'll start by talking about what it is that we do, and then we can talk about why it's unique. So our product covers 5 areas that we view as essential to being able to secure data. So the first one goes into data discovery. Having organizations having to tell us where data is no longer sustainable. Most organizations can't keep up with the pace of where data is found within their organizations. Replicas are being made, files are being copied. So being able to automatically discover where data resides within their infrastructure is a key first step. The second step is understanding what the data is. Classifying it is definitely a part of that, but contextualizing the data, understanding where similar subsets of data resides, understanding where the data came from, is also essential for us to be able to understand what kind of data is it. Is it regulatory sensitive data like PII, PHI, PCI? Is it sensitive from a security perspective like passwords, tokens, API keys? Or is it business sensitive? We're working with one pharmaceutical company that have us identify chemical formulas because they want the results of their experiments to be as secure as possible. That's their business. If that gets impacted, that has significant impact. And then the third step is understanding how data is managed. And this is actually where one of the key differentiations we have comes into place, because when we think about how data is managed, a very significant part of that is the access and usage piece. So understanding if data is protected, publicly accessible, encrypted, backed up, and so on is definitely important. But when it comes to data, data is unique from other cloud assets in the way that it's being used. So again, a compute instance somewhere in the cloud, you can limit who can access it quite significantly because there are very few use cases where it needs to be accessed. But when it comes to data, that is no longer true. So understanding who can access the data, or what I should say can access the data, what parts of the data they can access is not only very complicated, it's very, very important to be able to do. And it's complicated, again, both because you have so many different technologies, so you need to understand access mechanisms to all of those. And even for a single technology, access is not something simple to understand. You have different IAM roles that can be assumed by different people or by different applications. You have local users that can be accessed once you access a machine. So unraveling those access paths into the data is one part of that. Doing that in a granular level. So we're not treating an S3 bucket like a cloud asset and that's it, who has access to the S3 bucket. It's understanding object level controls to understand if a specific file can be accessed in a different way than other files. And we then complement that with near real-time analysis of usage logs. So not only we know who has access to the data, who has the permission to access data, we know who actually accesses the data and how. So these three first steps provide great visibility and already start answering some of the questions we talked about before. Do we have any sensitive data outside of production environments? Do we have any sensitive data that is overly excessive? Do we store any European data in the US? But where things really do become super interesting is when we feed that information into our gap analysis engine, into our policy engine. And that's where we can start identifying any policies, starting from things as simple as security best practices or compliance-related policies and regulations, all the way through insights around how risk can be reduced, unused data, unused permissions, over-permissive access, and so on, and all the way to identifying anomalies, suspicious behaviors, and any malicious activity around data, meaning that we don't only focus on reducing the risk, we also look at the threats or suspicious behaviors that can happen within that acceptable level of risk. Think about it like you might assume some risk when you give someone your house keys. That's fine. But now how do you make sure those keys aren't lost? And how do you mitigate against that type of behavior? You want to identify any suspicious or malicious activity around your house. And then the last step is we find something, we want to help resolve it. So how do we make sure that remediation can be done in the best way possible, either by performing some of the automatic actions ourselves, integrating with the organizational workflow, ticketing systems, alerting systems, notification systems, and so on, and providing contextual recommendations around what can be done, given all that we know. So our uniqueness is both the holistic approach we take around data, discovering it and understanding how it's managed, accessed, and used, feeding all of that into our policy engine, and then solving any issues we find. So that's kind of the breadth we provide, the end-to-end approach around data protection, whereas a lot of tools that exist today either focus just on the cloud assets, they focus on just on the classification, and you kind of have to stick together different tools to achieve the same result or even a similar result. I wouldn't say the same. Our focus on the identity and usage piece is definitely key in what we see as unique and something customer needs. And then I didn't mention not just the depth that we have around how far do we go into understanding the data and the data assets, but also the breadth we provide across different public cloud providers, data warehouses and data lakes, and even SaaS applications. So not only you get this understanding of who has access to a specific subset of data, you can see like the full exposure of a specific application or a specific entity in your environment.
Wow, so many golden points there, and huge points from understanding where data resides on infrastructure, classify and understand what that data is, how it's managed, who accesses it and how. And I'm curious, just to hammer home this point here, why would you say that is a problem security leaders need to pay extra attention to right now? And ultimately, just to hammer that point home, what will happen if they do choose to ignore that warning?
So I think more and more what we see is data becomes our business. Organizations cannot be trusted if their customers' data is compromised. We've only recently learned about a breach at 23andMe, for example. Yeah. I have my information there. That makes me concerned. When I got the next promotion about buying another, a family member, another kit, I hesitated, right? So businesses understand that first and foremost, it's their customers, it's their reputation, and if they want to succeed as a business, they have to find a way to leverage data to fuel that business, but to do that in a way that doesn't compromise it. The second piece is that it's not just the market and the consumers themselves influencing this, it's also governments. We're seeing more and more regulations that are aimed to protect citizens' information and to make sure that the private citizens, have a level of protection when it comes to what they share with the organizations they buy from or subscribe to. And with CCPA now, CPRA, with new regulation in Texas, we're seeing new regulations in New York. We're seeing improvements and additions to GDPR, and even new ones that are specific to Switzerland and Germany and so on. It's not just whether the organizations can maintain their reputation. It gets to a point where they have to have these controls in place to be able to even do business in specific geographies, and that list of geographies keeps expanding almost on a daily basis. So it's a must, right? They have to be able to do that in order to continue to run their businesses.
I love that line. Data becomes our business, and it's so true. And despite that, we are living in a digital age where cloud breaches like 23andMe that you just mentioned there, they continue to make the headlines on a weekly, sometimes daily basis. So how do your solutions ensure that businesses also are able to stay ahead of the evolving cyber threats and maintain that robust security posture?
So I think the first step is understanding the risk they have around their data, right? We talked about it. Many of the organizations we start conversations with, when we talk about what's your biggest challenge around protecting your data, their answer is, first, we need to understand where it is, right? You can't protect what you don't know. So the first step is to understand the risk that they take on by doing business the way they do today. The second step, and that is actually not as, given the platform we provide, doesn't have to be as challenging as it sounds, is to reduce that risk as much as possible without impacting the business. Many of the steps that you can take around reducing risk, organizations are concerned about doing that because they don't know what the impact is. But you'll feel much more comfortable removing a third-party application if you know that third-party application is no longer active and not reading this part of the data. So being able to reduce the attack surface, to reduce the risk without impacting the business, or at least understanding how it might impact the business, is that next step. And this needs to happen on a continuous basis, right? It's not a one-time assessment. We talked to with one company where they said that their current process is doing an audit, kind of a review of their data, of their access to it every 3 months. And the CISO said, I feel great to the day we do the assessment, but I know it's outdated the day after. So it has to be done on an ongoing basis. Right after you look at something, someone now might copy data from a prod environment, a well-secured prod environment, to a dev environment, to test something out, and now you have sensitive data and not in a non-secured environment. And then the third point is, we talk about acceptable risk. There's always risk to be accepted. If we weren't the only way to completely avoid risk is to avoid doing business. And now the question is, how quickly do you identify threats that happen when it comes to sensitive data, and how quickly can you respond to them? So having these three components that complement one another is the best way, in my mind, to be able to address these challenges.
Now, although we have talked about some of the negatives and some of the breaches, on a positive note, can you tell me about the recent shift in the tech economy? Is a good reason why it's actually a better time than ever to engage with early stage startups, and the value that security leaders can get as a result of that too.
Yeah. We're definitely seeing, as you mentioned, with economy being a bit more difficult, with budgets being a bit more stringent, we are seeing more organizations that are more open to working with early stage startups. And the reason for that is it's usually more common for an early stage startup to better fit the needs of a specific organization, right? I come from Palo Alto Networks. It's a great company. It's a great organization with great products. But if a customer that isn't like a Fortune 50 customer wanted to ask for a feature request, they had to go through their SC, their support person, their customer success, and so on before even talking to a product manager, let alone someone higher up. When working with an earlier stage startup like ourselves, we have a Slack channel where I'm on with the customers. So a customer can literally write a message that would immediately pop up on the CEO's phone a second later to ask for something or to raise an issue. So that creates this alignment of interest that is very unique, that cannot happen with larger organizations. And that means that our ability to better fit their needs and to maybe cover additional use cases, to get more out of what they put in terms of resources, in terms of time, and in terms of budget, is much higher because we can more quickly tune and adapt to the needs that we're seeing. And so we definitely see a lot more of that. Organizations, I think, in tougher economies times tend to shift into the two extremes. Either they'll just kind of consolidate everything, use one for all, and that would be it. And we do see some of those as well. But then the other extreme where we see organizations shift into is very like cherry picking the best of breed out of companies like ourselves to be able to more specifically address their needs and make sure that if they invest time, effort, or budget in something that they onboard, it brings them the best results possible.
Absolutely love that. How cool to be able to have the ear of the CEO and not be waiting on hold for 30 minutes listening to a message saying that your call is important to us. And I appreciate you probably can't share any names here, but I'd love to try and bring to life everything we've talked about and ask you to maybe share a few use cases of customers that you've solved some of the problems that we're talking about here for, just to bring it to life.
So I did mention some as we were talking, but maybe a few more to highlight. The best use case that I love, and I'll kind of follow the optimistic trend that we started a question ago, is when we can help organizations enable business. So, we have been working with organizations going through a data breach or having to go through like a very significant audit. But the best use case where I see kind of the most, the happiest type of success is where there's a use case around enabling business. For example, we're working with an organization where for them to be able to work with medical companies, for them to be able to work in the healthcare industry, they have to show that they don't store any PHI within their environment outside of very specifically defined areas. So we can help them do that. We can help them create a report that can be shared with their customers very quickly to allow them to address that specific concern and to enable that business. So, we just opened up this entire market for them and we're able to do so, which was really great for us, for us to provide this very positive value for them. Needless to say, it was also, once you connect that to a business use case, it's also an easy sell, right? Because they know where, this is the budget, this is the market that it will open for us, and this is how we can help to do that. Similarly, we pride ourselves in enabling organizations to use new technologies that they haven't been using before. So in some cases, we are actually being brought in by the CTO or the engineering organization to say, hey, if we use Eureka, we can use Snowflake the same way we use Redshift, and it wouldn't matter because they would help us make sure we have the same guardrails in place. And then, of course, the last use case And the one you probably think about most easily is how can we help organizations that are either very concerned about a data breach or have just gone through a data breach and have seen the repercussions of a process like that to make sure that an issue like that is less likely to happen and is better managed if it happens. So, for example, an organization that have gone through a data breach before, have deployed us, and have gone through not a fully blown data breach, but they have gone through credential theft. And they were very concerned that the meaning of those credentials being stolen is that they will be used to exfiltrate data. And we were able to show them using our usage analysis that those credentials weren't used across their entire sensitive data stores between the time of the suspected credential theft and today. So we were able not just to reduce risk, but to also alleviate concerns when it comes to the impact, the blast radius of issues that happen in the environment.
So important, especially with increased regulations such as NIS2 coming in next year, GDPR, etc. And on the behalf of startup founders listening here, because we began today's conversation talking about your origin story, how you got into this career and your time at the Palo Alto Networks. I'm curious, if I was to ask you to go back 5 years ago and tell yourself about becoming a leader and building a company, building a tech startup, is there any advice that you would give to your former self there?
Definitely. So many advices, so many tips around which stock to buy. No, I'm kidding. But when it comes to building a company, especially for founders like myself that come from a very technical background, I think the best advice, the best thing I could have done differently or could have done better if I had the chance is to use the opportunities that I had to educate myself, not just about the technical side of things. We tend to be very curious about how things work and about this breach and about that malware. And that's awesome. But if I could go 5 years back, I would also tell myself, be more curious about that sales process. Why we do marketing this way? Why did we build that customer success organization in that specific way? Because as a CEO, yes, it's great that I'm very technical and it allows me to engage with customers in a very unique way. But I'm also in charge of building the organization. And that includes all these other functions that technical founders usually don't have kind of this good understanding of. So that's probably what I would have done differently. Would have saved me some mistakes along the way.
And of course, none of us are able to achieve any degree of success without a little help along the way. We often bump into people who maybe see something in us, inspire us, help us, invest some time in us. So if you look back throughout your career, is there a particular person that maybe mentored you or just inspired you in your career that we could give a little shout out to today?
Yeah, there's actually a few that I would love to mention because I was very fortunate in my career to have several people that filled that role for me. So kind of from a more classical mentorship perspective, I have to give a shout out to both Lee Claridge and Mike Jacobson, with both of whom I worked at Palo Alto Networks. I came into Palo Alto Networks thinking, I'll try to be a product manager. It sounds nice, but I came from a very technical background and I didn't really know if this was my destiny. Obviously, 6 years later, not only I remained a product manager throughout that time, but I now kind of grew into being a CEO from that position. And I think a lot of the capabilities they have today around understanding a problem and making sure we have the right solution for the use cases we're seeing are from their mentorship along the way. And then last but not least, my co-founder was actually my first manager, my first team leader back when I started out as a software developer. And throughout the last over 15 years that we've been working together, I want to think about this as kind of co-mentorship. I hope that he feels the same way. But we've definitely challenged each other and helped each other grow within our respective roles. And I owe him a lot of gratitude for a lot of different aspects of my career. Eureka Security being just the last one of them for now, but hopefully not the last. So Asaf Weiss is definitely the second one I would mention.
Well, I think that's a powerful and beautiful moment to finish our conversation today. But before I let you go, we did cover so much there in a short amount of time. So for anybody listening, wanting to find out more information about everything that you do at Eureka Security, maybe mention, find out more information or contact your team, where would you like to point everyone listening today?
Yeah, I think the best place to start with would be, our LinkedIn page, Eureka Security, or our website, eureka.security. And if you want to test me on my comment from before about being very accessible, you can also message me on LinkedIn, and I'll be very happy to reply personally.
Awesome. Well, I just loved hearing more about your origin story, your career as a female tech leader and entrepreneur, the evolution of data security posture management, the critical challenges that businesses are facing in terms of things like securing their data and assets, and that great line you used there, data becomes our business, and also why it's never been a better time to engage with early stage startups and the value security leaders can get from doing just that, like having the ear of the CEO on a Slack channel. Love it. Pure gold, but thank you for sharing your story with me today.
Of course, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So as we wrap up today, if you want to learn more about Eureka Security and its approach to redefining security, I will add links as well as a link to her LinkedIn page over to the show notes, which you'll find over on my website, techblogwriter.co.uk. Go to podcasts. You'll find 2,500 interviews. But that's it for today. So just a big thank you to everyone listening, and hopefully you'll join me again tomorrow. But until next time, don't be a stranger.